Here we are again, Hornets, and we are back from spring break, and it is time for another rousing round of Ready Workbook Fun. Yay! So, just in case you don't know, we're on page 209, and while you're either getting out your workbook and your pen, your pencil, and your highlighter, I'm going to cover a couple of things because we're getting ready to get into comparing and contrasting genres. And this time, so we're going to go ahead and start our setup on our page. And remember, the very first thing we want to do, since it's a brand new lesson, is we want to go ahead and box that title. Okay. And then we want to make sure we rewrite it at the top that we are doing compare and contrasting genres. And when we say compare, I mean how things are similar or alike. And when I say contrasting, I want to know talking about how things are different. Okay. And when I say genres, I mean types of literature. So now, when I say types of literature, remember, we have 5 major genres that we look at, and that is fiction, which means it's fake, nonfiction, which means it's real. It's based on real people, places, and events and times and things that really happened. We have folklore, which includes our folk tales, legends, parables, fables, myths, anything in the oral tradition. And just keep in mind that is fairy tales. That is all of and tall tales that deal with folklore. Then we have poetry, and then we have drama. And keep in mind, drama is anything that is scripted and meant to be acted out. Now, for this lesson, we're focusing on our Mississippi College and Career Readiness Standards Reading Literature 7.9, which is where we're going to a fictional portrayal of a time or place with its actual real historical account, which means we're going to be looking at our fiction versus our non-fiction. Okay. And remember, fiction is where we deal with fake people, places, things that they said. It's not real, it's made up. Now, nonfiction is dealing with, once again, real people and times and places and things. One of my favorite examples is Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, because the story is about good old Abe and dealing with the Civil War, his rise to being a president, the battle between the North and the South. But while it's got some realistic type things from historical records and historical accounts about Abraham Lincoln, it delves into a whole lot of fiction with the fact that he is also, besides becoming the 16th president of the United States, hunting vampires that are controlling the South. So that's what I mean when we're talking about a fictional portrayal of something real. That's what historical fiction does. We've taken sourcebook notes on in the past on historical fiction, which I'm going to jump down here real quick. And it says historical fiction is a story set in the past that combines made up characters and events with historical figures and real events from a specific time or place. Okay. That is historical fiction. Ultimately, it's fake, but there are a couple of things that you pull from that make it seem like it might have happened, except for an Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. Vampires aren't real, so that's obviously fake. That's a very extreme example. What are some other things that you can think of that we might have already read that deal with a historical fiction account of something? Can you think of anything? If you're stuck, flip back to page 54, 56, 58, or 142, because we've already read 4 excerpts just from this workbook alone that dealt with historical fiction. Y'all remember reading on page 54, Black Sunday? That short story about that was set in the Dust Bowl during the Depression. That was, that covered that entire city and the girl trying to help her family get the horses and save them. And then we've got the excerpt on page 56 from The Prince and the Pauper that's taking a real prince and a real setting from the Middle Ages. Same thing with Scarborough Fair Fantasy on page 58, that it's pulling like real places and real medieval times things, but it is inserting fictional, because we don't know what they really said. We don't know what the dialogue was between the characters or the people. So some of that is made up, and that feeds into the fictional element. We also read the excerpt from Quicksand on page 142, and that was the girl coming over from New York to Denmark, going to Copenhagen, and that, we don't know what actually went on. We know that there's probably a ship that did that and other people that did that, but this account isn't necessarily true. It's taken some liberties and it's made up. Now, how I know that things are made up is, let's say, take the movie Titanic that came out in the 90s. Titanic is about the unsinkable ship. It takes place in the same year with the same specs for the boat. It even includes the real captain's name, some of the other major people that we know were on the boat. But the whole love story that revolves around between Rose and Jack, that is fiction. That is completely made up. And it's made up to make it seem more interesting. Because remember, the whole point of fiction is to entertain. Its purpose is to take you out of your time and place and put you into something else. So they used the historical accounts from the Titanic and added a love story that made you, or makes me want to watch it. I still think she could have scooted over on that door and given him some room. Anyway, so just keep in mind that when we're doing this, we're looking at how authors use actual real history to help make their fiction, their fake stuff, seem more plausible, like it could have really happened. And they use this by using, I'm going to switch colors for a second. They do this by using this idea of a historical account with a factual explanation, description, or narrative from or about the past. A lot of times we use these informational texts, which is what they are, to give us better versions of our stories, because if it's based on something real, it makes it seem like it could have really happened. And it's going to use historical documents and other primary sources. And once again, primary sources are journals, diaries, logs. For example, we're going to read something from Lewis and Clark on the next page. And it's them, they were keeping their record of when they were exploring the territory west of the Mississippi River. So, and also usually these primary sources and these informational texts, historical accounts, may narrate, summarize, or interpret, or even synthesize, which means put together, information taken from one primary source created during a particular time and period. Which means that there could be an entire, like an encyclopedia, has a whole lot of information synthesized, put together to help give you a big overall picture, and they pull from a whole lot of other different historical accounts, informational texts. Can you think of any informational text that you might have also read earlier in the year? There's a couple of them that you might have read in social studies. So, okay. Now, keep in mind that anything that we're looking for when it comes to this, we want to make sure that we're comparing, which once again is how things are alike, and contrasting, which is how things are different. So keep in mind that right here, we're going to be looking at our theme for the entire unit. The overall that we're reading about for this section is dealing with the time of transition. And transition means moving from one thing to another. Okay, and I also forgot to underline down here, and that's my bad, that these people in historical accounts are non-fiction. All right, historical fiction is fiction. It is made up. It is fake. And nonfiction means it's not fake. All right. So these people that are in these historical accounts, this nonfiction, actually lived, the places existed, and the events in the historical accounts really occurred. So Now, the other thing we're also going to look at throughout all of this is how we use, I'm going to add up here for underneath our standards, that we're looking to see how authors of fiction use or alter history to make their story better. And that is something that happens a lot. So let's scroll on down. And we're going to look, and it says to study the illustration below. Which details are based on reality and which are fictional? Well, I can look at this cartoon or this illustration and know that this is supposed to be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Okay. He was a real person. This is the civil rights movement in the 60s. I know that he is real. He is nonfiction, right? So I know, and I see the library or the bookstore somewhere that he might actually be, because he was a very well-educated man. He's got his doctorate. So being in the library or bookstore, that is somewhere I think that he could possibly be. That is reality. Now, when we look at this, I want to see if you can circle the fictional aspect. I'm going to give you a second. Okay. So the fictional way that we're adding this is I have no idea who this woman is. I can't see a face. I just see a side profile. So since I don't know who she is, I can't for certain say that he met this lady. So she's my fictional character. Also, since she's a fictional character, I'm going to circle her thoughts, because I can't delve into somebody's head to know exactly what they're thinking. And since this isn't a diary entry where he wrote something down or she wrote something down, I know that this is also a fictional moment when she says, or she thinks that I'm going to remember this forever. So we have no way to know if that's really what she was thinking. Okay. Now, when we look down here at the bottom, so it does tell us the image shows a real person, Martin Luther King Jr., standing next to our fictional character, a young woman who admires him. So in a similar way, historical fiction includes real people and events, and then alters some historical detail to tell a made-up story. And remember, that makes it more entertaining, because remember, the whole purpose of fiction is to entertain. So we're going to look at the chart below, and it says to consider how the author of historical fiction draws upon real facts to create a work of fiction. So we're going to look at how the author of historical fiction draws upon these real facts, these real things. So it says that it's set in a real time or place. Check. It's during the civil rights movement. So provides factual information. Yes, it's got he's even holding a book. He's in a library, or a bookstore, includes events that actually occurred. I'm sure he met a whole lot of people during his time marching for civil rights and pushing for civil rights, and uses historical figures. Yep, check. Language and details such as famous people, yeah, because he is very famous, and typical of customs of the time. Because you got to remember, this is pre-wearing our mask days, so people had no problem walking up and giving you a handshake. And then we want to look to see what it alters. Plot combines real and made-up events. Yes, it does. Real. He's real. And our character that's thinking that she's never going to forget this is made up. We have made up yet realistic characters interact with people who once lived. Yes, because I could very much see him shaking the hands of somebody who was an admirer, and then someone who was an admirer of his actually thinking that they would never forget this moment, which leads us to the next one, that it says most dialogue is invented. Well, we have no way of knowing what a character would be thinking or a person would be thinking. So unless they write it down in a diary like Anne Frank does for her book. Then we also may interpret or change historical details to create a better story. That does happen, right? So we'll go back to the Titanic. Just because the whole movie is not historically accurate. A lot of it is, but not all of it. Same thing with my earlier example with Abe Lincoln Vampire Hunter. It goes through some stuff about Abraham Lincoln's life that didn't really happen in order to make that whole vampire hunting thing come about. And then our very last little piece down here tells us that good readers understand that historical accounts use facts and information to inform readers about history, while historical fiction is meant to entertain readers with an engaging story that combines real and imagined characters and events from the past. As they read, good readers are aware of these differences and are careful to separate fact from fiction. So just keep in mind that when we are talking about fact, that is a historical, I'm changing the wrong color, that is a historical account. And when I say historical fiction, guys, keep in mind that that is fiction. So we're going to, once we start part 2, we're going to be looking at a historical account on page 210, and then we're going to be reading historical fiction on 211. And we're going to look and see what kind of historical facts they use, and then the fictional details that are put in. Okay, so if you have any question, as always, please ask. Otherwise, bye, y'all.